Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors. Before we move on, we've got a very different kind of sponsor for this episode, The Jordan Harbinger Show, which is a podcast you really should be listening to. And I know that every day somebody tells you that you just have to listen to some podcast, and you nod and say, sure, and then you never listen to it. Don't let that happen here. Jordan's show, which Apple named one of its best of 2018, is aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker so you can get a sense of how the world actually works and come to your own conclusions about what's happening, even inside your own brain. Each episode is a conversation with a different fascinating guest. And when I say there's something for everyone, I really mean it. In one episode, Jordan talks to a hostage negotiator from the FBI who offers techniques on how to get people to like and trust you, which sounds useful and disturbing at the same time.
Another episode tells the story of a cinematographer who discovered a lost city in the jungle and made one of the most important archaeological finds of the century. You guys may remember an ad we had earlier on with a young lady who had been a part of the Westboro Baptist Church. That was an interview from the Jordan Harbinger Show. I know a lot of y'all were interested in hearing the rest of it, and that's the kind of content you're going to get when you listen to Jordan's show. And he is always focused on pulling useful, practical insights out of his brilliant guest. And we're not talking about pop psychology or wishy-washy self-help stuff here. The episodes are loaded with bits of wisdom that you can use to legitimately change your mind and improve your life right away. If that's not worth checking out, I'm not sure what is. We really enjoy this show, and we think you will as well. Search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's H-A-R-B as in boy, I-N as in Nancy, G-E-R on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
When a person goes missing, their loved ones often find themselves overcome with worry and grief. Bruce Maitland started the 501c3 nonprofit organization Private Investigations for the Missing because he knows this feeling all too well.
When Bruce's daughter Brianna disappeared in March 2004, he was surrounded by licensed private investigators dedicated to finding her. Now his mission is to provide dedicated private investigators at no cost to other families of the missing, desperate for answers but without the financial means.
Private Investigations for the Missing needs your help. To read the mission statement, make a donation, and keep up with our blog, visit us at investigationsforthemissing.org and follow us at PI for the Missing on Twitter and Facebook and Investigations for the Missing on Instagram.
Because forever is too long to wait.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue our discussion of the Brianna Maitland disappearance. everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my Jitterunda co-host, Alice.
Hey, Brett. Thanks for that.
Hi, Alice.
Thank you for pronouncing that word for me, because I know you must have thought about it all day and practiced all day in preparation for your millisecond of pronunciation. Where did the S come in?
I spend more time worried about the pronunciation of these words than the entire episode. That is absolutely true. That means, supposedly, whatever that word is supposed to be, it means fabulous, fantastic, amazing. All good things. And that's from Stephanie. Supposedly, it is Dutch.
Oh.
Stephanie will no doubt tell me how terribly I pronounced that when this episode comes out, but that's fine.
Well, it was beautiful. However you said it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for those
Thank you,
that
Alice.
kind soft G word.
And it's always good to see you. It's so great. Saw you earlier today at the pool. But it's always good to see you on one of these live, not a Get Vocal. We need to do a Get Vocal sometime soon. But one of these live recordings here with our best friends on a Saturday night. Who, like us, have nothing better to do than to talk about true crime on Saturday night in the summer.
You're really
kind of sad.
You're really not making friends here. Brett, stop talking. As your friend and co-host,
but these are my best friends because we're all in this together.
This is exactly what I want to be doing on a Saturday night. I'm too exhausted from spending all day at the pool to do anything else but sit in my closet and talk to you about true crime.
Somebody said this is the best thing to do, and they're absolutely right. It is the best thing to do.
That's right.
I'm happy to be here. Happy to be back talking about Brianna Maitland. Do want to say thank you to so many of you out there. Yesterday, our first episode in the Adnan Syed series crossed 300,000 downloads. So thank you to everyone. By the time you hear this, it'll be higher than that, but we'll see where it gets to. But that's by far the most downloads we've ever gotten for an episode. So thank you guys so much. And especially to those of you who not only listened to the first episode, but listened to all 14. You guys are awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you for
listening. Thank you for joining us again.
And once again, I have to just note, like, numbers don't mean anything to me. I certainly don't know 300,000 people, so I know those are not my friends just hitting subscribe. You know, someone told me the other day, they're like, oh yeah, you have a podcast, right? I subscribe and I download them, but I never listen to them. And I was like, thanks. Maybe you could have not told me that.
Well, you see it on then they give you the stats. They give you the download stats and the listens. And there is always a difference. But, you know, whatever.
People may be saving it for, you know, a road trip.
Exactly. So if you're out there and you're downloading it but never listening, that's fine. That all of it factors into whatever weird algorithm people do to figure out exactly how popular a podcast is. So you guys are keeping us signed with our network, so that's a good thing. So we can keep doing this. We don't have to go back to being freelancers or whatever.
Brett, we've already said that this is going to be a long episode, so we should probably get to it.
Okay, fine. I like talking, Alice.
I know you do, but
I know there's people who hate the
am very tired.
chit-chat, but I'm not one of them. See, there you go. The truth comes out.
That is
it's not
the
about
truth.
Y'all. It's about Alice. Well, okay. So we're back on this case. Brianna Maitland. You guys who listened to the last episode, I'm sure you remember Brianna. She's a 17-year-old girl. She's going through a lot of changes in her life. Her parents, they have moved to sort of a rural area. She's had to change schools. She really hated it. So at some point, she leaves home to go back to sort of the area she was from, to the school where all her friends were. This puts her in a very delicate position because she's living with boyfriends, she's couch surfing, she's living with friends, she's living out of her own car. And she continues to do this even when her friendships start to fall apart. And the whole reason she's doing this in the first place, or supposedly doing this in the first place, falls apart as well when she leaves school. But it seems like she's kind of turning things around a little bit. She now has 2 jobs. She's just gotten her GED. Everything seemed like it was looking up. But then one day she's out with her mom. She's shopping. She sees something outside the store. She leaves the store. She never comes back in, and according to her mother, from that point on, she was kind of strange. But nevertheless, she goes to work. This is March 19th, 2004. She goes to work. She finishes her shift. as a dishwasher, and she leaves at around 11:20 p.m. heading back home. But she never makes it. And we talked about, as we were finishing up the episode last time, of some sightings of her car on the side of the road backed into an abandoned farmhouse. And the doors were open, the lights were on. The last witness to witness this car was actually her boyfriend, who stopped to close the doors and turn off the car. So that is very late at night or very early in the morning of the 20th of March. That morning, fortuitously for us all and for this investigation, a group of skiers is actually driving down Route 118, and they come across this bizarre scene at the old Dutch burn house of this car backed into the farmhouse. And if you've seen the photographs that they took, you know why they decided to stop. The scene was so strange to them, and it struck them that instead of continuing on down the road, which I think is probably what most of us would have done, they stopped, they got out of the car, and they started to take photographs of this vehicle backed into the house. And it was so eerie that they kept these photographs, and they would prove invaluable because when the police officers initially arrived on the scene, they thought this was just a DUI walk-off. So they didn't really take many pictures of the scene, and the car would be towed away. These photographs, few that they are absolutely invaluable because they give us the scene, they show us how the car was positioned, they show some items in the grass, everything about this case, to the extent we know anything, really comes from these photographs. They also noticed a broken necklace, which was later determined to be Brianna's, on the ground near the driver's side door. There were also a few other items from the car a few feet away from the driver's side door, indicating they may have fallen out earlier before the car moved to its final location. We're going to include all these photographs. We'll put them on the website, prosecutorspodcast.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you're probably seeing these now. And each one of these photographs tells a story. And it tells a story of what happened in and around that car before Brianna disappeared. And we're going to talk about that a lot as we go forward. So they take these photographs and then they head on down the road. At 1:22 p.m., a Vermont state trooper is dispatched to the scene, and he goes by, he inspects the scene, and he notes that nothing inside of the car looked suspicious to him. He saw only personal effects, including 2 unopened paychecks from the Black Lantern, which is where Brianna worked, that were made out to Brianna Maitland. He concludes the car had likely been abandoned by a drunk driver. It had ended up in this strange position, backed into this house. In his view, probably because the person who was driving it was drunk. And because the car was sort of backed into this house and sort of lifted off its back wheels, it probably would have had a difficult time driving away. This is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, and with the tires elevated, it wouldn't be able to gain traction. It wouldn't be able to drive. So he decides, drunk driver. He notes the license plate, he calls a towing company to move the car, and it's towed away to a local auto shop. The car was unlocked, which is consistent with what Brianna's boyfriend said, but the cars were not in the vehicle. Having seen the paycheck from the Black Lantern Inn, the trooper decides to head to the restaurant. However, it was closed that day when he got there, so he just left. And although the car was registered to Kelly Maitland, who is Brianna's mother, the Maitlands were not notified of the incident prior to the car being towed. No one bothered to call them, and I think the thought, at least for the state trooper, is this is a pretty typical thing. A car is going to get towed. At some point, people are going to miss it. They're going to call us, and they're going to ask for information where the car is located, and everybody will go on their business.
You know, I've thought a lot about the pictures that the 3 skiers took on their way and, passing by, stopping, taking the pictures, and the only pictures we have of the location of the car and really what I think is probably a crime scene. And I think about if I would have stopped. And I think what's so incredibly eerie about this scene is if this were a DUI event, or even if this was an accident, the reason it's so eerie to me is, first of all, when you typically run into something, it's typically the front of the car, right? DUIs, we see a lot of those. They're from the front of the car. The fact that it's backed into it with enough force to kind of lift its tires off, but not create a ramshackled scene, right? You look at it and you first look at the house and you're like, that's a little off. And you have to kind of look at it again to realize this is why it's off. A car is backed into it, but it's not like there are, it's broken through the entire wall. I'm thinking of the scene from Full House when Stephanie accidentally puts the car into drive and runs the family car into the entire house. And it's chaos. The entire wall has collapsed in, that sort of situation. It's not that. You almost have to do a double take to realize why it's such a strange scene, because it is not a chaotic scene. It does not appear that the car ran into the house with such force. Enough force to do damage and obviously lift the car up, but not enough to realize that this was like a high impact, high speed collision.
Yeah, really the only damage to the house was there was a piece of plywood that had been over either a door or a window that had been knocked out when the car hit it. And the other thing about the scene that's interesting is the ground. So imagine someone speeding down the road and they're drunk and they lose control. Now, ordinarily, like you said, they would just run head first into the house. Well, in order for that not to happen, the thing that they would need to do is spin the wheel so that the car slides backwards and rams into that house. And even then, you would expect a little bit more damage to the house. But what you certainly would expect is for the ground to be all torn up, if that's what happened. And the ground's not torn up. It's pressed down in places. There appear to be tracks in places, but it's not torn up in the way you would expect if this was some sort of high-speed, loss of control, spinning around before you hit into the back of the house, which makes me think, as we're going to talk about more, that at some point the car was parked there. It was parked near the house, and it was from sort of that position, parked there, that at some point it was reversed into the house. And I think that's my theory of how it ended up there. And I think that is borne out both by what you were saying, that there's not a ton of damage to the house, and the ground itself is not torn up.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost as if the car had just been plucked right to its final location, as opposed to seeing the path in which it took. And we'll talk more about this, but kind of with these pictures, you see the belongings that we now know belong to Brianna being not right next to the car, but a few feet away, which would support what you just said, that the car was at rest someplace, not backed up into the car, and somehow was reversed in that position. And when you put the car into reverse, you're going from a standing position or a still position to an acceleration. Meaning, if she was somewhat close to the house, there wasn't a lot of time to accelerate, so probably not a lot of speed in which to make the car back up into that location. Okay, so we've talked about the photos that exist, and that's all we have, and it's not crime scene photos at all. These are lay people taking photos of a strange scene that they've come across. The next day, on Sunday, March 21st, 2004, Jillian Stout returns home from her weekend trip. Remember, Brianna had left a note for Jillian telling her that she was going to come home after work. Now, the note that Brianna left Jillian is actually still on the counter, and there's no sign of Brianna in the home. Initially, Jillian did not find this that strange and just assumed Brianna was with other friends or her parents, because we've noted that Brianna was floating around multiple people's homes and sometimes even living out of her car.
Goes back to what we talked about last episode. One of the reasons this case is difficult to solve is because of that victimology aspect, that part of Brianna's life where there is no person looking out for her. There's no person making sure she gets home at night in any particular place. So there's no person when she doesn't show up that's overly concerned about it. And every day that passes, as we've talked about before, every moment that ticks by is a moment that it's going to be harder and harder to find her and harder to figure out what happened to her.
And that's exactly what happens. Even though Jillian comes home on Sunday, no one notices that Brianna is not around. Monday passes, still no one has noticed. On Tuesday, March 23rd, 2004, Jillian now is beginning to get a little bit concerned because she still hasn't heard from Brianna, so she calls Brianna's mom, Kelly Maitland. Kelly started making calls because she hasn't heard from Brianna either, and it quickly becomes apparent that no one has heard from Brianna in several days at this point. Kelly informed Brianna's father, Bruce Maitland, who was on a business trip out of town. He immediately leaves his business trip in New York and drives back to Vermont. At this point, Kelly called 911. And finally, many days later, the police opened a missing persons case, and Brianna was entered into the NCIC, also known as the National Crime Information Center, as a missing juvenile, being only 17 years old.
But there's still a disconnect here, and the police still have not put it all together. And we talk about this sometimes. People think of the police as being this monolithic entity. I mean, think of any conspiracy theory you've ever heard about the police. All the police know what all the other police are doing. They're all working together to make sure it all works out. And that's not true, and you see that here because the police have found her car. They just don't know it, and they don't even know it at this point. And it is really through a quirk that they figure it out. On Thursday, March 25th, the Maitlands, at around 9 a.m., they go to the state police station in St. Albans, Vermont, to ask for help looking for Brianna. And the way the story is told on some of the television shows about this, they're talking to the troopers and they're describing the car that Brianna's driving. And the trooper who found it just so happens to be there and hears them discussing it. And he pulls out the one picture he has of the car, the only photograph that he took before he left, and they look at the photograph and they instantly know it's Brianna's. And Kelly will talk about how when she looked at that photograph, it looked evil to her. I mean, it just gave her chills. And you know, it's hard to put yourself in the position of a mother looking at a photograph like that when your daughter has now been missing for several days. But at least now they know where Brianna's car is, and her father heads to the auto shop to inspect it himself. The auto shop hasn't really done anything with it. They've towed it up there, but they're just waiting for somebody to come pick it up. Inside, he finds all these items that he would not think Brianna would leave if she was leaving voluntarily, including those 2 paychecks, which are pretty important to anyone, but particularly to someone like Brianna, who it's not like she's got like a nest egg somewhere. He also finds some contact lenses and some migraine medication that she would take. And the keys are missing, and he realizes there's one place nobody's looked, and that's the trunk. And he asks for a crowbar, and he pops open the trunk, and when he does that, you know, in the back of his mind, he's wondering, am I going to open this trunk and find my daughter inside of it? He does not find that. All he finds is some childhood items from Brianna, some items that she was holding for a friend, and some other assorted things, but nothing alarming and nothing that told them anything about what had happened to Brianna.
You know, I didn't see many people discuss the childhood items in her trunk, but when I read that's what was in her trunk, it just struck a chord with me. I mean, it could be a number of things, but the 2 things that I think it could be here are, one, that she's still a child herself, right? That she really is 17 years old. And maybe these things were items that made her feel safe, made her feel like she had a home when she was bouncing around so many places. But the second thing that it made me think of was that by having these childhood items with her, she doesn't have a lot of space to keep things. So she can't exactly hoard a lot of things. She's not moving, you know, her house with her. She has limited items she can take with her. And one of the few items she decides to fill her car with are things that she doesn't need, right? Childhood items are mostly sentimental rather than necessary, like contact lenses or paychecks or whatever you need when you live out of your car. And that just made me think that she never intended to return home. It was a situation where at 17, she was already planning on never being home. I don't know about you, Brett, but like in my old age right now, I still have things at my parents' home, you know, like my childhood report cards, little things where if they were to be thrown away, I would be very sad. But I've also not done anything to move them to the home that I now live in with my own family. And so it really struck a chord with me that she was carrying these items around, because it was as if she never intended to go back home, or that she'd already not just physically moved out of her parents' home, but was like absolutely independent and an adult.
In this case, baffles me, not only because it's a baffling case, but because I have a great difficulty understanding what's going on here. In a lot of cases, I feel like, I mean, I would like to think this, that we do a pretty good job of putting ourselves and putting the audience in the shoes of the people we're talking about, to explain why they might have been doing things that don't seem like they make much sense. And the case that this reminds me of is Aisha Degree. So the Aisha Degree case was a case that it was so difficult to put myself in her shoes, not only because she was young and a young girl, but because of what she did. Just the fact that she gets up in the middle of the night and goes off into a storm for apparently no reason. And by all indications, Aisha Degree's family was a loving family that loved her very much. It's the same thing here with Brianna. Every single thing you read, there is not a hint that there's anything wrong with her family, that her parents are anything other than the salt of the earth, that they haven't been absolutely dedicated to finding her, that they haven't tried to turn this tragedy into a positive. We talked about private investigators for the missing last time. We gave them a donation, and I hope they use that money to do more good. And yet you have the situation where Brianna seems absolutely committed to never returning home. And people have said, well, they moved to a rural area. And okay, I get that, and that's not great, but it just seems like she is so committed. She's so much more committed than I have ever been to anything. I can't imagine being in her situation and not just running up the white flag and going home, but she is 100% committed to it. And I feel like there's something that's missing in this story. And as we talk more about this, we may see what that is. But this is often presented as Brianna was a free-spirited young woman, but otherwise everything's perfectly fine and she's just doing this. And I just don't think that's true. I think there was some real darkness going on in her life. It wasn't necessarily connected to her parents or her home life, but it was in her life. And it was keeping her from being able to do things like go back home.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Brett. The point about the childhood items that she was holding, I think, was from her perspective. Because, her mom immediately calls 911. Her dad leaves a business trip to come home. And all of their actions since then seem to indicate nothing out of the ordinary in terms of their relationship. But that doesn't mean we don't know some part of the story, and we don't understand what Brianna was feeling either. Now, not a lot happens in this case for, several weeks, because over the next few weeks, the search for Brianna intensifies. It's not initially clear to law enforcement if Brianna is missing or a runaway, and that complicates the investigation and the search for Brianna when you don't know where to look or what you're looking for. On March 26th, police conduct a canine search in the area where the car was found, but nothing was notable, and they really didn't discover anything from that canine search. Brianna's extended family arrive in town, and the Maitlands hand out missing flyers and continue to make calls. On March 30th, law enforcement begins examining the car for any evidence. I note that this is several weeks after, the car was found. You lose evidence over time. Just, it happens. Whether it's people, Bruce was able to look at the car. The tow company wasn't given any directive not to look at the car. We don't know who touched the car, but evidence can be spoiled. Evidence can be lost. Evidence can be added. It's not evidence, but after the fact, fingerprints can be added, for example, especially when you are talking about a span of several weeks before the police investigate it for any sort of evidence for their investigation. Now, investigators did not initially disclose what was found in their search, but did state that there was nothing to indicate foul play. From April 3rd to the 5th, the Class Kids Foundation helped organize a search to canvass areas within a 5-mile radius. More than 500 volunteers turn up to aid in the search. This really does catch fire, right? It looks like Brianna has disappeared into thin air. She is just a child, and she's 17 years old. This is a rural area without a car. She probably couldn't get too far, which is why a 5-mile radius is set up. But again, nothing is discovered. However, this big search was not a total wash, even though they didn't find any evidence or any signs of Brianna. The event was so widespread and the publicity was so big around it that it helped spread awareness and word of Brianna's disappearance and resulted in the witnesses who saw Brianna's car and took the pictures at the crash site to come forward, which is how we know these people saw her cars at certain times.
And there's very little in the way of clues in this case, but a big one comes in on April 15th. Bruce Maitland receives an anonymous tip that Brianna was being held in the cellar of a farmhouse in Berkshire, Vermont, roughly 15 minutes from the Black Lantern Inn, where Brianna was last seen. The police raid the house, but unfortunately, there is no sign of Brianna, though they do find firearms, cocaine, marijuana, and evidence of drug trafficking, which usually means baggies and scales. There were 4 individuals at the home at the time of the raid, all of whom confirmed knowing Brianna. 2 of the occupants, Ramon Ryans and Nathaniel Charles Jackson, were arrested for possession of narcotics. The men were originally from New York, but had relocated to the area to sell drugs. And both of these individuals will become very important as we continue to discuss the case. They will both deny any involvement in Brianna's disappearance. At this point, the trail goes cold for Brianna, though tips do come in, but they're not very good. Over the years, the search for Brianna has continued. In January 2006, there was a woman seen on security footage at a casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey. You see this in all these disappearance cases. Basically, someone seen from the side, or in this case, from above, that someone thinks looks like a missing person. Of course, it turned out not to be Brianna, and Kelly Maitland was able to confirm that. In March 2010, there was another tip that Brianna was buried in a sand pit in Richford, Vermont. It was dug up, but nothing notable was found.
Going back to that house raid from the tip that Brianna was potentially in the cellar of this farmhouse, I think it's really interesting that the 4 people who were in the house, clearly this house was used at least in part for drug trade, right? Selling drugs. That's what it appears, with the scales, the baggies to divide up the drugs, evidence of quite a bit of drugs, cocaine, marijuana. You usually have guns. That's not going to be surprising, because if you're selling drugs, there's probably going to be someone who wants to rob you or come after your goods. So you have to protect yourself. So all of these things that they find are very consistent with what you and I see in drug house raids. What I find interesting is all 4 of them say that they know Brianna. We don't really know how they know Brianna, but I haven't seen anywhere that they know her because they went to school or they knew each other through social situations, which of course then you have to wonder, do they know her because she was in their vicinity of what they do? And what they do is sell drugs. Whether she was friends with them, whether she partook in the selling or buying of drugs. It is just interesting because I think a lot of people got to gloss over that of how they know her, and how they know her is relevant because it will give us a view into what types of circles she was hanging around. And we know that she wasn't in school at this point. She had dropped out of school. She was, she took her GED. And so her social circles are not going to revolve around school. And what are they going to revolve around? Social situations.
Alice, as always, foreshadowing what is coming. There's a lot of debate about these people and how they know Brianna, how well they know Brianna. There are a lot of rumors and innuendo about them, and there are a lot of people who think they're strong suspects. And we're going to talk about that and whether they are or not. But I think Alice is right. This starts to explain why Brianna's living the kind of life she is. Because regardless of how involved she was in the drug scene, I think it becomes pretty clear that she was involved in it. And I think that was one of the reasons that she was staying on her own and not necessarily wanting to go home.
Absolutely. And one thing to note just from our experience in these types of cases, not everyone who is present at a drug house or present around people who are part of the drug trade partake in it. We have a lot of people who are part of it because of relationships, because they're dating someone there, or that's just their friend group. That can't happen. So note that you can still live in kind of this. I think it's a risky situation, right? Because there's reasons that they have guns and whatnot and not be part of selling or buying. So That's what we know so far. Now, in March 2016, the Vermont State Police revealed to the public that they had DNA obtained from Brianna's car. We've had Kristen Middleman from Othram Labs on a previous episode of Prosecutors Podcast. And if you haven't heard that episode, it is just fascinating what they do. And I'm not surprised that they stepped in this case because they have some of the best technology for DNA analysis, I think, in the world right now. And they were called in and they assisted the police in testing DNA that was found at the scene. In March 2022, the Vermont State Police state that they identified the source of the DNA, but have not yet been able to match it to an individual. If you're interested in genetic genealogy, you are absolutely in luck because we talk about this at length in an episode on our other podcast, Legal Briefs. Basically, what this is saying is when you test DNA, you burn up DNA. Because some of you may be wondering, okay, if they got the DNA, why did they wait so long to test it? And then once they test it, why did they not find anything? When you test DNA, you burn it up. It becomes nothing. So if you have a limited amount of DNA, which is what it sounds like in this situation, you kind of have to wait until the technology is such that you can get something out of that sample size, because that might be your only shot. If you use up all of your sample, that's it. You don't get further testing down the line if technology advances. And I think that's why they waited until 2016. There was probably enough advancement in the technology at that point to be able to get something from it. And they were able to identify the source, but you don't always know who that DNA belongs to. If you're not in some database to match it to, then you have it and you just kind of have to hope at some point that you'll be able to match it to someone who is close enough to help you map out the genealogy. In a 2023 interview, Lou Berry, a private investigator working with Bruce Maitland, claimed that the DNA had been matched to an individual, but they had absolutely zero involvement in this case and had never been on police radar. Lou states during the interview that his strong assumption is that any DNA found at the scene had been identified and determined not to be relevant to the case. That's a pretty bold claim because the police hasn't come out and said that. And that's really hard, Brett, to have the DNA and you know who it belongs to, but knowing that that person has no involvement. Now, we don't know that to be the case, though.
And you can hear Lou's interview on Missing Brianna Maitland, which is done by our buddies from the Missing Maura Murray podcast. And look, I think Lou knows what he's talking about. Lou has a lot of sources. And I think Lou's probably right about this. And this is just a reminder to everyone that just because you find DNA doesn't mean it's related to the case. And sometimes you're going to run it and you're going to think this is going to be the break we need. And then you find out who it is. And it's like, nope, not at all. And from what Lou said, reading between the lines, I think unfortunately this DNA is a dead end. And that's too bad because a lot of people were really optimistic when this DNA evidence, when it was first talked about, when Othram came in, they were involved with it. And we'll see if anything changes on that front. But at this point, the case is really at a standstill. There aren't a lot of leads right now. And as we said when we started covering this case, this is another one that the more people talk about, the more it's possible we can solve it. We never like to say a case can't be solved because it happens all the time in cases that you think would never be solved. A lot of times I thought Delphi would never be solved, and all of a sudden it was. And I think it's good to think about these cases and to run through them again and see if if anything rings a bell. This is a case we're going to go through the theories here in a second where it's possible multiple people are involved. And if they are, then multiple people know things. So I think it can be solved, even though that's pretty much all the evidence we have. It's the end of the timeline, and not a lot has happened since 2016. Let's talk about some of the weird stuff in this case. I mean, this is a weird case. The location of the car is striking. This farmhouse where Brianna's car was discovered, it had been abandoned since 1986. There were two brothers who lived there, elderly folks, and they were brutally attacked and beaten in the home so badly that they ended up being hospitalized for the rest of their lives, and they never returned to the house. And it was the kind of place that had a reputation as the kind of place you don't necessarily go at night because you never know who you're going to run into. And there have been stories of firearms and drugs and everything else found inside that house. It's a strange place, but it might be the kind of place that would be a good place to meet up for various reasons. It's on the road It's not a incredibly well-traveled road, but it's not in the middle of nowhere either. So you could imagine someone saying, hey, let's meet up at the old Dutchborn house. Nobody's going to bother us there. Is that what happened here? We don't know. Another thing that we can't rely on in this case is cell phone information. Even though this is 2004, Brianna did not have a cell phone. It is said occasionally that she would borrow her mother's, Kelly Maitland. That is true, but she did not have it on her at the time. So cell phone information is useless in this case. There's nothing we can derive from that. One of the weirder things that I think has been absolutely confirmed as true is that there was a lime wedge found on the trunk of Brianna's car, the same trunk that was rammed into this abandoned farmhouse. And this has led some people to speculate that there was a party at the Dutchburn house that night. Maybe everybody was drinking Coronas, slicing up limes and dropping them in there and going. Or maybe everybody was having margaritas. One thing I will note, it was 8 degrees that night. Now look, you folks in New England, you're hardy people, lived up there, became a little hardy myself, but never as hardy as you are. Maybe you are hanging out in 8-degree weather at the trunk of the car, slicing up lime wedges and drinking Coronas. I don't know. But this was found. It was on the car. So who can say? It's possible the lime could have been from the restaurant where she worked. She parked next to the dumpster, and some people have wondered if maybe someone was throwing the trash into the dumpster. A lime wedge falls out, lands on her truck, freezes to the trunk because it's so cold, and just travels with her. Hard to say, but one of those facts that it sticks with you. It makes you want to. There are certain facts and cases that just grab onto you, and you just want to make them important because it seems like this has to be important. There's no way the lime wedge is random, you know?
Yeah,
but
the lime wedge is so weird, especially because it's in winter, right? I mean, it seems like the only reason you'd have a lime wedge is for a drink, whether it's because you were at a bar, which she was, because that's where she worked, and this was just trash. But of all the things that could fall out of a bag, a trash bag as it's being thrown into the dumpsters is like one tiny lime wedge that perfectly lands and is able to withstand driving to the Dutchburn house and some sort of collision, even if not at a, particularly catastrophic collision, but enough of a collision to lift this car off the ground and to stay there. It seems like that a lot of things would have to go that way in order for the lime wedge to stay from the trash can at the bar. But for the other theory that you raised, Brett, that if it was from a party or some get together at the Dutchburn house, if it wasn't a very large party that we could think of, because from the picture that we have of the car that the skiers took, there's no indication of solo cups. We've probably both been to college parties in the middle of nowhere, at a farmhouse. In fact, I went to college in farmland, and the next morning, especially because it was dark the night before and people are drinking, they're not going to be very tidy. There's going to be, cigarette butts on the ground from people who were smoking if they were outside, solo cups from drinks, empty beer cans, other lime wedges, just some sort of debris. And it didn't seem like there was debris on the ground there. And the second reason that I don't think it was a very large party, if there was one, is the fact that no one has talked. That is, we've always said this, it is really difficult to keep a secret, and it's really hard to keep anything secret when there's more than one person, much less a party of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, many more people. That not a single person would have said, yeah, we were there. This is why this was happening. And no, I don't even know who Brianna is, but I was at a party at the Dutchburn house. We have not heard anything like that.
And the other thing is, you have at least 3 people who drove by the car and noticed it that night. But there's nobody who says they were driving by the Dutchburn house and there was a party going on. You haven't heard anything about that. So it seems like whatever happened at the Dutchburn house happened when there was nobody around. Now, look, there may only be a car every hour driving down that road, but you'd have to have a pretty fast party and cleanup, as you're pointing out, to not leave some trace of yourself behind. And in those pictures, you can see things from her car on the ground, but there are no beer bottles, there are no solo cups, there are no discarded bottles of tequila or whatever. So I think the idea of it being a party is it probably didn't happen. And if there was a party, I don't think it was there. That's sort of my thought about that. The last thing, which is interesting. So the police, and this is one of those things that I just don't know what to think about this. If you guys have listened to Missing Brianna Maitland, which you have to listen to, if you're interested in this case, we are barely scratching the surface with our 2 episodes. Missing Brianna Maitland goes into a lot of detail. They interview a lot of people. They have a lot of great connections with the family and with the private investigators. If you're interested in this case, if you've enjoyed our coverage, go listen to it. And one thing they talk about is that you had this group that helps find missing children, and they processed the car after it was released to the Maitlands. So at some point, the police are like, look, we can't get anything else out of this. We're releasing it to you. We processed it for all the evidence we have. So they turn it over to them, and then the Maitlands turn it over to this group, and they look at it, and they just find all kinds of things. They find traces of vomit. They find what they think is blood. They find a syringe and the cap off of a syringe. Now, it's impossible to know where and when all of this came from, but it certainly has given rise to speculation that this is part of drug use that we have hinted at. That Brianna was using drugs. You know, she lived in her car. She would have been using drugs in her car. Perhaps she's using something like heroin, which would involve injections and things like vomiting, and that was what happened that night. The problem is, because she was living in her car and she spent so much time in it, it's also impossible to say whether or not this stuff came from the night of her disappearance or is left over from some prior period. And they just did a really good search, and they found all this stuff that could be evidence of something that happened that night, but it's really impossible to say whether it was.
Yeah, I think that's right, Brett. I mean, I'm glad they looked at it. I think it gives us more of a picture, like you said, as to why Brianna left a seemingly loving home, at least a roof over her head, and was living in 8-degree weather in her car. That perhaps there was something more at play in either drug use or whatever she was dealing with personally. So that's all we know at this point. And like you said, the case is kind of at a standstill. So let's dive into theories, because I'm sure a lot of you have thought of the runaway theory at the top of your mind since we started talking at the beginning, when we said that she was living somewhat of a transient lifestyle, including living in her car. So this is probably going to be the most obvious theory you're going to think about, but it's probably also the least convincing theory, that Brianna ran away. Several friends mentioned that Brianna had expressed interest in leaving Vermont for a bigger city elsewhere. Additionally, law enforcement initially suspected Brianna may have run away. However, in 2008, the police issued a statement that there was no evidence she ran away and likely met with foul play. Unfortunately, I think that came many years later, and a lot can be forgotten in that time. I think a lot of people who may have seen something may have forgotten in that time. And people tend to want to come forward if they think a crime has been committed, if they think they can be a witness who can help find a person or catch a perpetrator. But if you think someone just ran away, you may not think anything that you saw is going to be important, because that person left of their own volition and you're not part of any sort of criminal investigation. So unfortunately, they did say that, but I think a couple years too late. Now, there are some major issues with the runaway theory. First, if Brianna had left voluntarily, it really doesn't make any sense that she would abandon her only mode of transportation, the 1985 Oldsmobile. And even if she didn't have that car, she would need money to start her new life. So why would she leave 2 uncashed paychecks sitting in her car? Why not take them with her? Especially if she was cashing them, it might not be traceable. People may not know where she's going. It's not like it's a debit card or a credit card where someone can look up the transactions and find out where she is. And the other thing is, if you were to run away, you still existed some sort of community, but there have been no credible sightings of Brianna since the night of her disappearance, anywhere in Vermont or elsewhere. And honestly, without a car and without money, she probably couldn't have gotten that far away. And like her father noted, she left behind things that she would need. Why wouldn't you take your contact lenses if you were starting a new life? Again, not something that people could use to trace you. Why not take your migraine medicine? Migraines can be debilitating. You would think that she would need her migraine medicine wherever she went. It didn't matter whether she was leaving or not. And Another thing, I go back to the childhood items in the trunk of her car. She has spent, the last year, essentially 6 months, driving around with these childhood items in the back of her car. And if she were to run away, it just seems strange that she would leave everything behind. Not just necessities, but these sentimental things that she's spent the last 6 months, or at least she spent this time driving around in the back of her car.
And there's the fact that she doesn't need to run away. This is not somebody with a wife and 2 kids. It's not somebody with overprotective parents who don't let them out of their sight. If Brianna wanted to go to some other city, she could have gone. Nobody would have stopped her. There was nothing holding her back. There's no reason for her to stage some sort of kidnapping and disappear into the night. She would have just said, I'm moving to Montreal, and she would have gone, and no one would have stopped her, and she would have cashed her checks. It's silly to me that the police ever entertained that, and it always blows my mind how often the police, and I get it. I know, you look at the statistics and they're insane. It's like every day, 80,000 people disappear in America, and you're like, wow, that's incredible. That's so many people, and like 79,995 of them disappear because somebody didn't see them for a couple hours and call the police, and they're like, well, why don't you just wait a couple hours? And they show up and they're like, you mean you called the police on me? That's crazy. I was at the bar with the boys or whatever, right? Or they run away for a day or whatever. And I get that. And I know the police face that all the time, but nothing about this. And it amazes me. And we talk about this all the time, where nothing about the circumstances would make you think somebody ran away. And yet you're willing to entertain that possibility. It's just, I don't know, it blows my mind. It's a complete waste of time. I can't believe the police wasted any time on it. A more likely possibility, though I think still an unlikely one, is that Brianna was abducted, the victim of some sort of abduction. One possibility is that someone was waiting in her car when she left work that evening and overpowered her. This is the classic urban legend. Someone's in the back seat. The problem with this is, even though it's true that Brianna didn't often lock her car, because my understanding is it was manual, said you had to lock each door manually, there was no button. No one's waiting in somebody's car in 8-degree weather for them to come out. They're just not going to do that. They're not going to freeze to death in the back of the car in the vain hope that someone will eventually come. So I don't think that's what happened. Another theory is that maybe she was coerced into pulling off the road that evening, and maybe that was what resulted in this wreck. Though once again, imagine a situation. 2 cars are driving down the road. The person who's pursuing attempts some sort of pit maneuver where basically, if you've ever seen Cops or Live PD or any of that stuff, you kind of hit the back quarter panel of the car. It causes it to spin out. Then you stop them. There's no evidence of a spin out. And so if they did that, you would expect you would see some sort of evidence. Now, there have been rumors of a possible sex trafficking. Sex trafficking comes up all the time. I will say this. Brianna, unlike a lot of cases where sex trafficking is raised, she fits the picture. She is transient. She has no fixed home. She may be involved in drugs to some extent. So maybe you could imagine that happening. So I guess that's a possibility, but I still think it's been 19 years now since she disappeared. I think we would have some sort of answer if she had gone into the sex trade at some point. We would have some sort of answer. Either she would have died at some point, or she would have been arrested at some point, or she would have returned home at some point. I don't think she would have gone 19 years in that, being caught in that sort of circumstance and you not seeing anything about it. Now, there's an interesting twist on this. So Brianna was trained in jiu-jitsu, and apparently she was quite good at it. And a lot of people speculated that if a single attacker attempted to abduct her, she could fight them off. And so therefore it would have to be multiple people who tried to kidnap her. Let me say this about that. And I am not criticizing self-defense training and all that stuff at all. Do that. Those are all good things. But number one, there's a difference between being really good in a martial art when you are in a martial arts competition and being able to use that versus a random attacker in a life or death situation. Not saying you can't use it, but it's very different. And no matter how well trained she is, it may be the case that someone bigger and male could overpower her. The other thing is, we know for a fact that one time when Brianna was attacked by someone she probably could have used her skills against, she did not fight back. And so I don't know that this jiu-jitsu thing is as important as some people make it out to be.
I think that's a great point, Brett. I agree. I've seen the jiu-jitsu point made a lot about her, and she could have been, a master at jiu-jitsu. But I do note this, and I say this for all the women out there who may overestimate their ability to fight off an attacker, because I think it's very important. I too, have had some training and I was like, I'm good at this. But the reality, and I've never been in a situation where I've had to use any sort of self-defense to actually preserve my own life. It's always been in controlled environments where I'm, like, fight me. Let's see how strong I am. Let's see if I can get out of this. I don't know. Maybe I'm just like a dark person, but I want to see if I can get out of certain holds. And when it's my husband, who is a foot taller than me and like 75 pounds heavier than me, I can't get out of any hold. Like when I tell him to just wrap his arms around me, I'm like, let me see if I can get away. I do all these true crime stories on my podcast. I just want to know if I can get away. And the answer is, I can't ever. I've never been able to get out of those holds. And he's not trying to hurt me, but I do note that because you can be very trained and those are controlled environments, but the element of surprise is a huge one, right? Especially if someone is hiding in the bushes or jumping out at her when she's not expecting it. It can throw off everything, and especially just the weight issue. If someone weighs a lot more than you, there's really only so much you can do when you're pinned to the ground, and that amount of weight, which your body cannot overpower, is succumbing to.
Or if they have a gun or a knife. I mean, then what? All the training in the world doesn't help then, if they have a gun or a knife. And most people are going to abduct someone, probably are going to go into the situation armed. So, yeah, I don't see a lot from that. And I hear people come back to that multiple times, and I just think that's a red herring. Now, look, there is a possibility that this is less pernicious than we think. That somehow Brianna lost control of her car. Maybe she pulled over for some reason and accidentally had the car in reverse when she thought it was in drive, and somehow ended up with the back end of that car in the farmhouse where she can't actually get away. Even if she's all by herself, she can't move the car because the back end is elevated. She can't drive away. If she's stuck in that situation, she's in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone. And it's 8 degrees outside in the middle of the night. She probably doesn't think she can just hang out in the car. So in that situation, maybe she tries to walk for help. Now, there's a couple things that are possible if she does that. First, she could have hitchhiked with the wrong person. And we've talked about this, what are the chances you run across a serial killer, except when you do. We just did the Highway of Tears, where a lot of women who were hitchhiking ran into the wrong person at the wrong time. You can imagine that happening. The other thing that I think makes that less likely, but doesn't necessarily make it not being nefarious less likely, is the fact that both doors were open and the lights were on. And that makes you wonder if it's sort of a Jason Landry situation. We talked about Jason Landry, who was driving down the road, got into a car wreck, and disappeared. And there's this question, was he abducted? And we thought, no, probably what happened is he hit his head. And then he acted in some sort of bizarre way. And in this case, you have the doors are open, the lights are on. You can imagine she's hit her head, she's disoriented, and she may not have been in her right mind. She could have wandered off. And it's possible she ended up in the woods somewhere, lost, and has simply never been found. We have talked about this so many times. When you are in the middle of nowhere and people don't know where you are or where to look for you, it is possible to be a couple miles away from your last sighting. Brandon Lawson, great example of this. A couple miles away, you get lost, and unless someone stumbles upon you, a hiker or a hunter or something like that, you may never be found.
Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. 1 purchased equals 1 donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
If you're a parent or share a fridge with someone, Instacart is about to make grocery shopping so much easier. Because with family carts, you can share a cart with your partner and each add the items you want. Since between the two of you, odds are you'll both remember everything you need. And this way, you'll never have to eat milkless cereal again. So minimize the stress of the weekly shop with family carts. Download the Instacart app and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply. For 3 orders in 14 days, excludes restaurants.
Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40. Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of theories there. So let's talk about the potential serial killer Maura Murray connection. We started last episode saying how a lot of people have tied these cases together, and you can see why. There are young women who have disappeared very close in proximity to each other, seemingly one night, and their cars were left behind. So there is a theory that there was a serial killer active in the area, and Brianna was a victim to that serial killer. This is largely based on the idea that Maura Murray's disappearance in February 2004 was linked to Brianna's. Both women's cars, like we said, were found abandoned off the side of the road with personal items still in their vehicles. However, authorities have actually ruled out any connection between the two cases. The incidents occurred 90 miles away from one another, and there's no evidence suggesting that they are linked. There was also some speculation that maybe Brianna was a victim of Israel Keys, but according to grunge.com, his financial records confirmed he was not in the area at this time. So as popular as that theory may be, he just wasn't physically in Vermont at the time to be the reason that Brianna is no longer here today. Police did look into this possible connection in 2012, but the FBI also ruled out Keys. And Brett, I know this is going to come a shocker to many people, but as it turns out, Keys did not murder every person who's ever gone missing.
And I know, Israel Keys is like the boogeyman of true crime. Oh, you got a case that's unsolved? Probably Israel Keys. I bet it was Israel Keys. He probably did it, right? And it's just like, no, he probably didn't do it. And he probably didn't do this case either. So I think we can probably rule out Israel Keys. I know there are people who love to think he's involved, but it's literally based on nothing. There is no evidence whatsoever. The only evidence that it's him is we don't know who did it. So maybe it was him. I guess it's possible, right? I mean, the funny thing about Israel Keys, and I guess we should just do like a case on him at some point. It's not like most of his victims are unknown. It wasn't like he hid the fact he was killing people, I mean, I realize the thing about him that makes people like him is a possibility is his randomness, that he would just he didn't kill people in one area and he didn't kill people in one way and he hid these kill kits all over the country. And I mean, okay, but in this case, there's no real evidence it's him. So I think we can rule him out. Another thing I think we can rule out, but maybe not, is a party overdose. Party overdose is kind of like aliens. Whenever anything weird happens, people always think, must have been a party overdose. There is always a rumor in every little town whenever anyone dies or disappears that there was a party overdose. And maybe the most popular theory out there and widespread, particularly in the area, is that Brianna overdosed at a party and died. And in order to hide their own involvement, a group of locals then disposed of the body, swore themselves to secrecy and I know what you did last summer type situation, and has kept that vow to this point. And like I said, this is a theory in every missing persons case, including Mara Murray, who we talked about earlier, but it is usually not what happened. But some of Brianna's friends are convinced that this is the answer, but there's no real evidence for it. Let's talk about Keely LaCrosse. We mentioned her earlier. Keely and Brianna have a lot of history. Keely was one of Brianna's best friends before they got into a fight over a guy, because what else would you fight about? A popular theory online is that Keely was involved in Brianna's disappearance, and this theory appears to hold some weight, as the women had been involved in this love triangle, or maybe even a love square, with James Robatali and possibly someone else, and it ended in Keely's physically assaulting Brianna, which also resulted in assault charges against Keely. But wouldn't you know it, once Brianna went missing, Keely was reported by the Disappeared program to have smugly claimed that now nothing will happen with the charges since Brianna was not around. Keely, she does not bathe herself in glory throughout this entire story. And the charges against Keely were, in fact, dropped in the midst of Brianna's disappearance. Now, she has been publicly cleared by the police, which we obviously put a lot of stock in that. When the police say you didn't do it, we tend to think you probably didn't, even though, once again, when the police clear you, it just means they cleared you for now. If there's more evidence that comes up, they could always decide that you actually are involved. But a lot of people wonder whether she was looked into enough. Now, Keely has an interesting history since this whole thing happened. She was interviewed by Chloe from True Crime Twins and Crawlspace, and she says the fight was blown out of proportion. Though if you've seen pictures of Brianna, it doesn't seem like it was blown out of proportion to me. In 2008, Keely was implicated in a federal cocaine and heroin distribution conspiracy in northern Vermont. But she was smart, and she joined Team USA, Team America, flipped on her co-conspirator, and was able to enter into an agreement with the government. The primary distributor that she worked with was a man named Aaron Pendergrass, and she testified against Pendergrass, and he received a sentence of 120 months imprisonment. She received 8 months with 3 years of supervised release to follow. In 2012, she violated her supervised release when she was arrested as part of a home invasion in which she had bit the owner of the home. And I tried to find more details about what led to this and the biting of the owner of the home, but I could not nail it down. Either way, eventually her federal supervised release was revoked, and she was placed on home confinement for 6 months. But you know what? As Alice and I found so often, once you're violating supervised release once, you're probably going to violate it again. And sure enough, she did. In 2013, she violated her supervised release and committed a DUI with her child in the car. And she was actually sentenced to 15 months for violating her supervised release, which I will note is more time than she got for her actual crime, which is something that also happens on occasion. But from all indications, it appears that after she spent 15 months in prison back in 2013, she has kept a clean record. As for James Robitaille, Brianna's ex-boyfriend, and the subject of the fight between Keely and Brianna, and one of the witnesses who drove by Brianna's car and who we're going to talk about some more later, there doesn't seem to be any indication that the police ever believed that he was involved or ever considered him a suspect. And if he was, we will probably never know. He died in a car accident in 2019.
There's a lot going on in Keely's life that we just kind of went through. And you can see why this is an attractive theory, because we don't know much about what was happening in Brianna's life, but this event sticks out because charges came from it. So even if Keely says it was not a big deal, even if Brianna said it wasn't a big deal and that she didn't fight back, it was a big deal in that there were no other charges that involved Brianna at this time period. But there was this charge that was brought against Keely. And look, it is true that if Brianna was gone, the charges would be dropped. It's probably something like it's dropped because there's no indication that she's gone forever. She's missing so far. It probably was like dismissed without prejudice, but these sorts of charges have statute of limitations, and if it's dropped and she's not around, it's not going to get prosecuted. Now, was it great of Keely to say, haha, now that Brianna is missing, I get to escape these assault charges where I was in the wrong? No, it's not great. Is it indicative of guilt? Not necessarily. It's a stupid thing to say in light of someone disappearing who may have been met with foul play because it puts you at the top of the list for suspects. But because it's so stupid to do, it almost seems like she was saying that because of her beef with Brianna rather than bragging about being the reason that Brianna's missing.
No, I agree with that. I think, and we'll talk about our theories at the end, and I have a very sort of inchoate theory, kind of like a conspiracy. I have, and it sort of involves her in a way, but not directly. I don't think she was involved in this. I don't think she did anything to Brianna. I think she was a really horrible person for a chunk of her life, and hopefully has turned her life around, and she wouldn't be the first person to do some really stupid things and turn her life around. But look, it's been 10 years since her last violation that I could find. If she's committed any other crimes, I don't see it. That's a long time. Usually, and I think Alice can testify to this, usually with people, and you talk about rehabilitation, usually you're either going to go through something like that and turn your life around and never commit another crime, or you're going to commit crime after crime after crime, and it doesn't matter how many times you get arrested, and doesn't matter how many times you go to prison, you're going to keep doing it. And it kind of seems like she may have actually turned it around.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, the things that she was involved with are very serious. The fact that she got 8 months for this drug conspiracy is incredibly light. I don't know the facts of the case, but if the main distributor got 120 months, 10 years, we're talking some serious amounts of drugs being moved, and she was involved in some way in that situation. So her life was not clean. And clearly she struggled with substance abuse if she was committing a DUI with her own child in the car. But maybe that was the wake-up call she needed. Sometimes when your own kids get involved and, if the judge is like telling you, you could be dead, your kid could be dead, sometimes that is the turning point. I hope that was the case for Keely. Based on no discernible record after that, I do hope that is what happened. So we've danced around this other theory a little bit, and that is that this was drug related. Now, one of the most widely believed theories is that Brianna Maitland was murdered as the result of a drug debt or some other drug-related cause. Rural Vermont was in the midst of a drug epidemic when Brianna went missing in 2004. The area struggled, like a lot of rural places, to be honest, with an influx of hard drugs, including crack, cocaine, and heroin. There are varying accounts of Brianna's level of drug use, though. You know, we have that syringe in the car. We don't know if it's hers or not. We don't really have any indication, direct evidence of what her drug use was. But the general consensus appears to be that she was an occasional recreational drug user, having experimented with marijuana, crack, and cocaine, but was not a heavy user. I note that if she was an occasional user of those things, she certainly, there's different types of occasional users that we see. There's occasional users of like less risky drugs like marijuana. If you are an occasional user of crack or cocaine, if you get a bad batch of either of those, it could kill you. You could get addicted with one hit, depending on how your biochemistry is made up. So you can get addicted. It is possible to be an occasional user in that you don't use it daily. You may claim that you're not addicted, but those are particularly dangerous drugs because they usually pass through the hands of someone who is adding something to it. Crack, you cook it, right? So if the drug dealer who's making the crack makes a bad batch, it could kill you right away. So it is a risky thing. This is not just smoking a joint. Now, one of the drug dealers, Jorge E. Soto, claimed to have killed Brianna and buried her in a field. We've seen this before where people claim that they are the murderer. In this case, police feel confident that Soto's statements were bravado and not legitimate. But according to reports, Soto had been in jail up until the day before Brianna disappeared, and he was in the area. But the two names that come up again and again in this theory are the ones who were in the house that was raided by the police in April of 2004. Nathaniel Jackson, a.k.a. Lowe, and Ramon Ryans, a.k.a. Street. After receiving the initial tip, the anonymous tip that Brianna was being held in the basement of their Berkshire home, police received another tip that the men had murdered Brianna over a debt that Ryans owed to Brianna. I note that that's kind of strange. Typically, when we hear about drug debts and murders, it's that Brianna would owe a debt and was murdered because she couldn't pay it back. So I just note that this story is a little bit different than kind of the typical drug debt murder you would hear about. It said that Ryans was borrowing money from Brianna to buy cocaine, and the two had gotten into an argument when he didn't pay it back. I'm going to stop there really quick, too, because we know from the raid that Ryans, at least, was in this house where there seemed to be drug trade. Brianna is working probably a minimum wage job, living probably paycheck to paycheck in her car. She was not someone who was flush with cash. It strikes me as a little bit strange in this theory that the person who has access to firearms, a lot of drugs that are worth money, and the ability to sell them with scales and baggies to package them up and be able to sell them, is the one borrowing money from basically a 17-year-old working a, very low income job living out of her car. It's possible, but it's strange. Now back to this theory. The tipster went on to say that the pair that killed Brianna dismembered her with a table saw and disposed of her at a pig farm. In 2007, a Vermont newspaper published a sworn statement from a police officer which alleges the same thing. I think that's really strange that the police officer isn't swearing in court, but is swearing to a newspaper anonymously. It's all very strange. That's not typically what police officers do. If they're going to swear to a statement to a newspaper, they're going to swear it in court. However, as you can tell the way we're talking about it, this source was not thought to be credible. Law enforcement have not been able to conclusively link Jackson or Ryans to Brianna's disappearance, despite all of this, theorizing about them being involved. And no charges have ever been filed against them pertaining to Brianna's case. Ryans took a polygraph test, but the results were inconclusive. We've talked about this before. A polygraph test does not actually detect lies. It detects your biometrics, like your breathing, your heart rate, that sort of thing. So inconclusive could mean anything. According to some of Brianna's friends, Jackson threatened them at a McDonald's, telling them that if he went down, he'd make them all disappear. As for Ryan's, this wasn't the only disappearance he's involved in. On July 4th, 2004, his live-in girlfriend, Gia Collins, disappeared. That's just a couple months after Brianna went missing. Now, Ryan's was the one who reported his girlfriend Gia missing, and at the end of the month, her remains were sadly found in the Green Mountain National Forest by some hikers, and she'd been beaten to death. A friend of Ryan's, Ellen Ducharme, was later convicted of murdering Gia after confessing to the murder. Ellen said that she had robbed Gia during a drug deal and beat her to death with a baseball bat. We only bring this up because it is interesting to note that Ryan, who is thought to be part of Brianna's disappearance, had another disappearance in his life. But it seems like Ryan's had nothing to do with his girlfriend's murder. Seems like a very sad situation.
And let me just say, what this is indicative of, though, is how dangerous his lifestyle is and how random death can be in this lifestyle. And we all want all this stuff to make sense, and we want a reason for Brianna's disappearance and, unfortunately, most likely her death to make sense, and a story that we can buy. But just know, when the drug trade is involved, a lot of times life is so much cheaper than you would ever imagine. You know, you think out there, and we hear this all the time, the number of people who just can't imagine why anyone would ever murder anybody, and that's a good thing that you feel that way, but they constantly question motives, like, well, would they really kill someone just because they rejected them? Yes. They would kill them for $20. Like, when you were in it, when you see it, I wish you guys could walk in our shoes for just like a week, because you see how people, sadly, they do not value the lives of others. And you see that in this case, where this poor woman was beaten to death with a baseball bat by another woman over some drug debt. That's why it happened. And that's what you see in these cases. So don't assume that whatever happened to Brianna is going to be some complicated, interesting thing that makes sense. Once you're in it, once you're in that game, you never know how it might end up.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Brett, because these two guys, whether they're involved or not, they were certainly involved in the more dangerous part of the drug trade. When you have crack involved, cocaine involved, that's a lot of money, and it's a lot of usually your customers are going to be addicted. We honestly have never seen an occasional crack user. Crack is such an addictive substance, and it does such a number to your brain that it's really scary, right? And what do you want when you're a seller of drugs? You want people to come back over and over and over. And when they come back over and over and over, you have a good income stream. So whatever is going on in Ryan's life or whatnot, we know that he is not in the casual drug trade. He is dealing some pretty serious stuff, and there are going to be serious people involved. Again, I go back to the firearms. This is not your, nice drug dealer on the corner rolling you a blunt. He is in some dangerous circles. And if they knew Brianna, she was also in some dangerous circles. So the private investigators in this case are pretty convinced that this was some sort of drug-related murder, and that, in fact, multiple people were involved in the murder and know who did it. I certainly think somebody knows something, and there are just parts of this story that are missing. So that does ring true to me, that someone knows something that we don't yet know.
Yeah, I think this is a someone knows something case. I will say this. You hear so much about these two guys. You hear stories that Brianna might have been dating one of them. And if that's true, who knows what's going on here? I think they are not involved. I think if these two jokers were involved, we'd know it by now. Because I think someone would have flipped on them. I think someone would have rolled on them, or they would have rolled on each other. Because when you have that much interaction with law enforcement, nothing stays secret. And we see it all the time. I mean, it is just one guy rolling on the other one and giving you everything they can give you to cut some time off their sentence. And so, to me, it's been 20 years. I just feel like if either one of these guys did it, and this is an unpopular opinion because I think these guys are super popular suspects. Personally, I think we'd know by now.
I think that's a really good point, especially when you have Ryan's girlfriend dying in a very violent manner. And before she was found, when she was missing, all the heat, is going to be on him because in the span of 4 months, 2 women who he might be connected to are going missing in seemingly similar fashion. All the heat is going to be on him, and yet nothing comes up. In fact, I think the reason they are so popular is that it touches on something. We'll talk more about theories, but drugs may have been involved. I just don't think they're the right people within the drug theory that we should be looking at. And unfortunately, so much attention has been paid on them that I don't think other real leads have been looked into with respect to a drug-related murder. And they overshadow all potential suspects in this field.
So Madison, our awesome research assistant, helped us with this case and included her own theory. And what happened. So I'm going to read for you Madison's theory, and it's a pretty good one. So she says, I believe that Brianna likely had plans to meet someone she knew after her shift at the Black Lantern Inn. It seems to me that the earlier encounter at the mall could have been a warning, or Brianna could have arranged to meet up with someone later that evening at the old Dutchburn house. There's no sign of a struggle inside the vehicle, leading me to believe Brianna either exited the vehicle voluntarily or was coerced by someone she knew. Either way, I think she ultimately met with foul play and was murdered on the evening of March 19th, 2004. In my opinion, the motive was likely drug-related. Okay, so that's Madison's theory. Do you want me to do my theory next, or Alice, do you want to do yours?
Go for it.
Okay.
I wonder...
Then I'll follow it up with some brilliant theory that makes me look silly, okay?
No, I'm not going to do that. I don't know what your theory is. Like, everyone who's listened for a while know we don't share our theories beforehand. But... I think we might have the same, like, totally crazy theory. Not just who did it. Yeah. I don't know about... Just in the way you've been talking, which would really validate, because it's crazy. There's, like, no evidence of it. Okay, go.
Okay,
you go.
Well, I have a theory for which there's very little evidence, so maybe that's what it is. And, I mean, since we're just risking
it all.
Defamation suits left and right, we might as well add another one to the list.
I wish I knew some lawyers.
I know, if only I did. So, I think Madison is right that the event that happened at the store is connected. I think, and I hate to say this about someone who can't defend themselves because they're no longer with us, but I have some real suspicions about Brianna's boyfriend. The same boyfriend who says that he came upon her car, closed the doors, and turned off the lights. And that would be James Rubatali. So at this point, a lot has happened. There has been the fight between Keely and Brianna, where this is over James, and she gets punched in the face by Keely over him. She has filed charges against her. And I wonder if that day, and she had broken up with James at this point. They were now no longer together. Obviously, a lot of water had gone under that bridge. And I wonder if that day she looked out and saw him and went out and spoke to him and made an arrangement to meet with him at the old Dutchburn house after work. And I wonder if she went there. And let me say this. I'm going to take James out of it for a second because I do think this happened. Whoever it was, I think she met someone at that house. They got in the passenger side of the car. Whatever happened at that point. If it was James, I think they had a conversation. And I think maybe at some point James brought up Keely, and maybe James suggested that Brianna should drop the charges against her. Remember, Keely is somebody that James is close to. He's been close to Brianna. He suggests she dropped the charges. They get into a fight at that point. Or maybe it was some sort of drug deal gone wrong. And there's a person in that passenger side who wants to sell drugs or whatever to her. At some point, I think the way that car ended up where it did, a fight happened. And I think Brianna tried to get away. And I think when she tried to get away, she threw the car into reverse hit the gas and ended up slamming into that house. Hard enough to knock the plywood off, but not being far enough away to gain enough speed to either create a lot of damage to the house or to do a lot of damage to the ground. At that point, either the person had already gotten out of the passenger side, left the door open, come around, jerked open the driver's side, tried to do something to her. In the process of trying to pull her out, her necklace ends up broken on the ground. The bottles that were in her car end up on the ground. She hits the gas. She goes backwards, slams into the house. The car will no longer move. She can no longer get away. Whoever it is takes her out of that car and I think kills her. And I think the fact that you don't find her body means it probably was someone who knew her. We talked about this before. Typically, when people hide bodies, they are willing to take the chance of being with a dead body and taking it to a place to bury it because getting rid of the body is more important to them than just leaving it somewhere. Because they know if they just leave it somewhere, it may be traced back to them. Which makes me think it was someone she knew. The fact that we don't know what happened 20 years later makes me think this is a single type situation, not multiple people there. That's essentially what I think happened. I have a lot of suspicion about James because to me, the coincidence that he just so happened to be driving down the road drunk and yet had the wherewithal to notice the car in the dark with the lights. I mean, imagine the situation. It's one thing to see a car on the side of the road with the headlights on and think, that's weird, and keep going. It's another thing on a dark night, on a dark road, to see a car with the headlights shining towards you, to look at it and to say, even though, how can I make out any details of that car with the bright lights shining at me? That's my ex-girlfriend's car. Oh, and I'm drunk when I make that recognition. And then pull off to the side of the road and do what he did. Close the doors and turn off the lights. To me, that feels like the kind of thing somebody would do after they've driven the body away to get rid of it. Then they come back to the scene. They do that and they tell the police that later to explain, if you find anything of mine there, well, I just got there and turned off the lights and closed the door. And it seems like the police didn't really look into James. James is no longer with us. So like I said, he can't defend himself. And unfortunately, if it were James, I think in some ways that's the worst case scenario because that means we may never know what happened. Because, as I said, he would have taken any secrets he has to the grave with him. If it's someone else, if it was someone else in that situation, some sort of drug transaction, then you could imagine them talking, or maybe some evidence comes up later, and maybe one day we do solve it. But that's sort of my thought about what happened.
And I think that's a really good thought because we know so little here. I think I was correct. I think both of us really seized on the fact that James driving by after the first two witnesses note that they see the car in the state that they do, which is that it seemed to have been left hastily with doors open, lights on, is strange and very convenient. For the last episode, I had talked about how strange it would be for him if he is coming from a party in the middle of the night in such cold weather to be able to see the car, make it out. And even if you were to make it out, to stop, change the situation of the car so that it doesn't draw additional attention and not call the police when this is someone he, even if he's not dating her now, meant something to him at some point. She was clearly in a dire situation if it was 8 degrees outside and her car was left in a state that she did not pack it up for it to be in. So I think it is incredibly convenient for him to have been someone who drove by and closed the doors, turned off the lights. And your theory sounds great. I have nothing to kind of push against it except a couple things that keep coming back to me and why I can't quite wrap my head around that situation where she rammed her car back, was trying to get away. I think the fact that there seemed to be no struggle within the car indicates that she did meet someone there, that she went there of her own volition. I don't think that she spun out. I think we would see more disturbance in the grass. We'd see more tracks or something like that, or more damage to the front of the car. From the picture, it seems like the only damage is the back of the car. And it seems like it was when it was backed up, that was the only kind of collision that occurred. And so we have no seeming struggle within the car, and we have her belongings a couple feet away. I wonder if she had met with someone that she knew. She planned to meet there, whether it be drug related, whether it be James, talk about relationship matters, what have you, that they were they got out of the car and they were talking, so that they were already out of the car. And the out of the car situation is also with the keys. I'm very thrown off by the keys, that the keys are not in the car, because if it were an emergency situation, it seems like the car would still be in the situation with the keys in the ignition, but we know the ignition's not there. And so someone, I think not Brianna, removed the keys at some point. Because I think if this is her car, it's her only mode of transportation. If she had to get anywhere, whether it's away from an attacker or to run away in life, she needed her car and she needed her keys. And so for her to leave her car in that state, lights on, doors open, I would fully expect the keys to still be in the car in that situation, but they're not. And so I think whatever happened to her, there was a cleanup afterwards. I don't mean a literal cleanup of like wiping things down, but someone came by to basically draw as little attention to the situation as possible as you can with a car that's backed up into the Dutchburn house. But they succeeded because no one went looking for Brianna for several days. And those several days, a lot of things can happen. Bodies can be disposed of. Evidence can be lost. The theory of a runaway can take hold rather than any sort of foul play. But I don't think it was premeditated, if that makes sense. It all seems very ad hoc, and everything went right for this ad hoc murder, essentially.
Yeah, I think what most people would call perfect murders are dumb luck. And I think you're right. I think there might have been premeditation to the extent they met there. But this idea that if someone warned her while she was with her mom, don't go to work, someone's going to kill you, we would know that by now. Like, if someone was willing to do that, there would have been an anonymous tip telling us exactly what happened. And, you know, some people think that she was in the basement of that building or whatever. But I think if it were that, we would know.
And I also think it's probably, and this is so sad to say, because I don't think Brianna's still alive. I don't think she's living her best life somewhere in the Caribbean. I think she died that night. I think she was probably murdered. The sad thing, and the reason I think we don't know anything about this, is it probably was not something sensational. It probably was not this great drug debt. If it was drug related, it probably was not this huge, like, I'm going to go to the police because I have all of this evidence on you and you're going to go away for 20 years. And like, Brianna, you open your mouth and you're going to be dead. You're going to be for the worms. If it were drug related, I can imagine it being something as stupid as, no, Brianna, you were short $5 last month. I'm not going to spot you another $5. That's 10 too many. You're never going to pay up the $5. Absolutely. Like, I think it's something so small and stupid like that. Or if it were emotion related, it was also not some fantastic love triangle, dark sort of love sexual fantasy. I think it was something as simple as like emotions got out of hand. And I note all this because violence is around so many corners. It's not something that I like to think about all the time. It's something that we see, unfortunately, all the time. But mundane things turn into catastrophic events when it's not something that you would write a book about. It's not something that you'd make a movie about. It's something so seemingly boring and uneventful that it's shocking that it could lead to the end of someone's life. And I think that's probably what happened in this case, that it was nothing that was fantastic or, fireworks. It was quite the opposite. And that's what's so sad about this, because I don't think we'll really know what that was.
And it is a wild world out there. Jason Blair is in the chat room, and Jason, as a reporter in Baltimore and with the New York Times, has more of an understanding of this, I think, than most people do. law enforcement has an understanding of this as well, and the people who are in it have an understanding of it. But our country, I can't speak for everybody else who's listening, but our country in particular, those of us who are living this like nice middle class lifestyle have no conception of how tenuous and violent and easily lost life is in certain places. And that's why I think you're right, Alice. I think whatever happened, she was in such a bad place where the smallest thing, something so insignificant, could end in murder.
And here's how I think she may have even died, which was, again, not something that was, Hollywood-like. I think it's even possible that it was as simple as they were out of the car. Maybe they were sitting in the car because it was really cold, and things got heated and she's screaming and they both get out of the car, and it's just part of the fight, right? That's why the doors are open, because like, no, come back here. Don't you walk away from me. And they're screaming a couple feet away from the car. Maybe whoever she's fighting with grabs at her, and that's where the necklace breaks, and maybe things drop out of pockets and they're just screaming. And it's something as simple as she's punched in the face like she had been. She'd already suffered a concussion, except this concussion maybe knocks her out. And she's not dead, and she could have survived it if she had gotten help and she wasn't in 8-degree weather. But the person who punched her freaks out because you don't really know, like, if she's dead or you just knocked her out, or she'll wake up and press charges. She's already pressed charges against Keely. And so let's say if it were James, she punches her in the face, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. Not only are you drunk, you're driving, you just punched someone in the face. Maybe you think she's dead. Maybe she's not breathing. Maybe she isn't breathing. Maybe a second concussion does her in. And instead of getting her help, and she could have completely survived from that knockout punch, they drag her a little bit into the woods and she dies from the elements. It could have been something as simple as that. Maybe there was a little bit of a cover up after the fact, but maybe it wasn't even like I'm here to murder you, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to carry this through. It could have been something as stupid as that she was knocked out and, I'm going to be in so much trouble. Like, let me drag her over here. And may have left her not even knowing if she was going to die, but it was 8 degrees. And maybe she had gotten the breath knocked out of her, and without some CPR, she wasn't going to breathe again, and that kills her. I think it could have been something as simple as that.
And then, I mean, if it's someone unrelated, if it's not James, you just get out of there as quickly as possible. And you don't bother to do things like close the door or turn the lights off. It's sort of an interesting, we talk about behavioral analysis, and we always end up doing it. But, we talked about hiding a body versus not hiding a body. Well, doing things like closing up the car and turning off the lights, maybe if it were someone, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if we're James, that would have been something he would have done right then. He would have closed the doors and turned off the lights right then because he knows her and he's connected to her and he wants to make it seem as not unusual as possible. Whereas if it's someone who kind of knows her, like in a drug situation, but don't know her that well, that happens, and he's just thinking, I got to get this body out of here and like drop her in the water or something. And he's not worried about closing up the doors and turning off the lights or anything like that. And look, I think this is one of those cases where there is the cases that tend to grab people are the ones with just enough information that you can create any story you want to make. And they don't have enough for us. It's like, look, Maura Murray in this case, they are similar and they are connected in that there's just enough to hook you. And once you get to where that car is, you can go anywhere. You can create the wildest theory you can imagine. And I think this is a case like that. And I think people want to believe it was a serial killer. Because serial killers, number one, they're rare, and number two, you can sort of conceptualize them and order them in your life. Whereas the kind of murder that Alice is talking about is so senseless and pointless, and yet it happens every single day. And that, if you're just playing the odds, that's what's most likely, is that something like that happened.
That was really sad. It was really, really sad.
Yeah, look, this is a really sad case. It really is a sad case because in some ways there was a lot going against her, but in other ways there was so much going for her. She did have a family that loved her. She was trying to turn her life around, and she was turning her life around. And yet something happened that night, and it all went sideways. And at 17 years old, she lost her life.
Yeah. And one more thing, I do think this was by someone she knew or she met with, because if this were a random murder or a random attack, they probably would have grabbed her paychecks. I mean, we've seen this before where people murder people for really stupid things, like a car stereo, right? And if it were not emotion-based with her, I think they probably would have grabbed whatever was close by and just hightailed it. At least they get something out of the interaction, which is why I do think this was someone she knew.
No, I think that's right. I think it's someone she knew. I don't think it's a random attack. And I think that's about all you can say about this case. And I hope that one day there's some sort of break in the case that gives some closure to her family. They've been committed to finding justice in this case. And like I said, one way, there are two things you can do if this case really grabbed you. Number one, listen to Missing Brianna Maitland. It's a great series on this case. True Crime Garage did a great couple episodes on this case. We listened to both of those. There's an episode of Disappear. There's lots of articles that we're going to post on the website. But the biggest thing you can do is, as we said, Bruce Maitland, who is Brianna's dad, has started a charity, PIs for the Missing, which their entire thing they do is to try and help families like they're on have the resources they need to hire private investigators to look for clues, to try and find closure for these families. It's a great charity. We will link to it. I hope you guys will support it. We've supported it. And I think, we always try and talk about how do you honor these people? How do you honor the victims? We talk about the victims. We try and bring something to it. We all hope that we can solve these cases, but we know how hard that is. This is a concrete thing you can do in this case. And I think anytime you can bring a little light to darkness, it's good. And that is one way that this case can be something where there's at least some light. We'd love to know what you guys think about this case. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Hello to those of you who've hung out with us for almost 2 hours now on this episode in the chat room. All of you who are patrons, we love you guys. Y'all are the best. Thank you so much. You make this so interesting, and we get a little live feedback too. It's always nice to be able to address some questions that I know many of you are having out there in the world as we talk about these cases. Well, Alice, we've gone a little bit long, but do you want to try and answer a question today?
Of course.
We got some tough ones, and I don't know if we should try and do a tough one or not.
I'm tired. I don't know.
I mean, some of these, I need to send you this list because some of these we need to sit around and think about for a while. Now, one thing, Alice, you're going to have to do, Daphne asked a question that many people have asked, which is whether or not they can get your hot sauce recipe.
Oh.
So we're going to have to do something about that.
Yes, absolutely. We can. I just need to write it down.
So there's we have the gallery on Facebook, but there are many spin-off groups. One of which I think is Prosecookies. Prosecookies? I think they're
I love a good pun.
And they are the cooking subgroup. So I think if nothing else, Alice should have to post all her recipes on the cooking subgroup, the Prosecookies. So maybe she will do that. But here's a real question. This one's interesting. I'm going to make you answer this one first.
All right.
This is from Kelly, and Kelly asks, if you guys could start a podcast individually on one subject outside of true crime, what would you podcast about? I guess I'll answer it first.
Oh,
because I think everybody knows the answer. I really like history. I would love to do a history podcast. It'd be amazing. So I would either do a history podcast or just a straight paranormal podcast. That would be my thing if I wasn't doing true crime. It'd be either just all paranormal all the time or some sort of history podcast.
I think you would rock at both, and I think people are chomping at the bit for you to start that history podcast in particular. I know I'd listen to it. I think mine's pretty obvious.
Is it?
Yeah.
Cooking?
No.
Childcare?
It would be about moms, just
there
all
you go.
But it'd be comedy relief for moms, because I think that it is really hard for all, not just moms, parents of young children. I think we live in more disconnected times than any other generation, right? Well, I mean, I don't live close to any family. You don't really, live directly next to any family. And raising kids really does take a village. And even if that village is through a podcast or online, I think it helps so much. So I think it would be for like comedic relief and also to build community, because there's so much to be shared about the experience of this phase of life. And because there's a lot of us.
I think that'd be wonderful. I think basically, if there are any podcast producers out there listening to this show, sign Alice up for the Moms Podcast. I'll do the History Podcast. You guys can provide us like a team of people, and we just show up for makeup and to talk. It'd be amazing.
Makeup. You know what a podcast is, right?
Well, you can see us on this one. You gotta integrate YouTube.
This is not good.
Yeah. That's why we need makeup.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I think that's all we have for tonight. Alice, is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
I'm really glad that you guys requested this case. I think that hopefully there's a break in the case that the family can get some sort of closure, because while I can't quite put myself in Brianna's shoes when she was 17, I really can put myself in her parents' shoes, and to this day. And I can't imagine the just incredible hole in their life, and to not know what happened to their daughter is devastating. And I am so honored that her legacy continues because of her father helping others. And it's terrible that he has to help others, because this happens, unfortunately, to people, and it's going to continue to happen. But hopefully with this type of coverage, we can be more aware, we can talk more, that these investigations can move faster, that people can come forward with information sooner, so that we don't go 19 years and still not have an answer for the family. So I think this is an incredibly important case, because every life is precious and every life is important. And I hope Brianna knew that at the end of her life. I really hope that she knew that she was valued and she was important. And I'm really sad that she wasn't able to kind of see through the upward trajectory that she was on, because she was tenacious. She was incredible, all that she was able to do at such a young age. And if she had been given the opportunity, I think she would have really done something incredible and had a great life story to help lead others out of darkness. And hopefully her story will allow people maybe in her similar situation to not end up in the same place that Brianna did, but that they can kind of learn from this and take from this and stand on the shoulders that came before us.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to focus on whatever sort of was going wrong in her life that might have helped create the circumstances in which this happened. I think that's really easy to do, and to forget that she was 17 years old. She was 17 years old, and she had faced a lot of hardship, and yet she was overcoming it, and she was, like you said, tenacious is a great word to describe her, because she was fighting through it, and she was going to get through it. And I have no doubt about that. I think if this event had not happened and she had gotten through this, she would have started at community college. She was a hard worker. She would have become something. And it's just sad. We're almost 20 years since whatever happened to her. And we always say it's amazing to us how many people listen to the podcast who end up having personal connections to this case. And I think if this is solved, it will be because someone who was involved talked to somebody and said something. And for whatever reason, that secret has been kept up to this point. And if that is true, I think it's time to start. It's time to start bringing those secrets out into the open. Well, this is the end of September, which means next week, 20% of you will go away, and the rest of you will enjoy our amazing October episodes, all 5 of them, all absolutely true crime cases that just so happen to include either a connection to October, horror movies, or the paranormal. But cases we could cover at any time during the year. I just want to point that out.
They're just true crime in October.
Exactly. So those of you who, for whatever reason, decide you're just not going to listen in October, give it a chance this year. I'm blown away by you guys who go away in October and come back the first week in November. And you exist, and you know who you are. So stop it. But we're going to do our October episodes, and we look forward to doing those with you. I look forward to watching horror movies with some of you who enjoy horror movies, because we're going to connect a horror movie with every one of our episodes, and I will watch it. Alice won't. I will join you on Twitter.
I'm going to watch a rom-com at the same time. Those of you who want to watch a rom-com with me, I'll watch the rom-com. Completely unrelated to the case.
Completely unrelated. But that's what's next. So get ready. Next week, October is coming. It's amazing. You're going to love it. We'll be back next week with something spooky and October themed, but also true crime. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
Now that I think about it, can I hear myself? I don't know. I never noticed.
So if you hear yourself like
a second later.
A half a second later.
I don't hear myself. Why not?
Do you actually have the headphones turned on?
Yeah, because I hear you.
Are they plugged in? Oh, yeah, you hear me.
I hear you. I don't know. Huh. I just realized that.
That's weird.
I used to. There was a time when I did, but I've just realized that I don't right now. So whenever I get like an email announcement of one of like my friends who's had a baby, you know, like friends who you may not keep in contact with all the time, and whenever someone names their child Alice, I want to be like, was it after me? It's clearly not. But I'm like, was it me? Like, it was me, right?